All right. It's one past, so I would like to start.
Karen, Miarinzo is not there yet, our presenter.
Okay, then I'll start slowly, and then I will walk you a bit through the what we've done already in the program, and then we will hopefully smoothly, while Lorenzo is coming in, move over to your presentation. So yeah, welcome everybody to I think it's the fifth part of the Drought Learning Series, which is hosted by the Red Cross and Red Crescent Climate Center, the German Red Cross, and the Anticipation Hub. And with our Drought Learning Series, we wanted to dive into drought anticipatory action. And as you can see here, we are again in the fifth part of this series. And maybe to give you a brief recap of what had happened so far, we started off in the middle of February with a bigger picture session in which we wanted to look at drought as a humanitarian issue and the role of the Red Cross and the Red Crescent within drought response and drought anticipatory action. So here we wanted to understand, like, what does it actually mean to act early before drought? And then in the next two sessions, we wanted to dive more into understanding drought risk. So the first of those two sessions focused a lot on understanding drought as a hazard and its impact. So here we wanted to conceptualize what is it actually, what we mean when we talk about drought. Are we talking about a rainfall deficit? Are we talking about food insecurity? And how are these things interlinked? So this was the first session of understanding drought risk. And then in the second part, we wanted to understand, so now when we're looking at the impacts, for example, food insecurity, what does that, how is that further influenced? So there we try to look at underlying drought risk factors to understand, what else is there when we're talking about drought risk, about the impacts, about the hazard as such. And after having understood drought risk, we then moved into the forecasting side of things. So moving to the trigger development in anticipatory action for drought. And so for 2 weeks ago, we looked into current drought forecasting tools, and we had the example of Kenya, and Kenya Met was also present to present how they developed the trigger for their drought early action protocol in Kenya. And then today we will look more specifically into developing triggers for drought anticipatory action. When then, if you have potentially you have noticed, we follow a bit the structure of an early action protocol. We start with understanding the risk and what are the impacts, and we need a trigger. And lastly, we will close with what are the early actions for drought. And here again, we will have two sessions. One will look a bit at the theory of change for drought early actions. So here we want to understand, okay, what do we need to do when to reduce the impact? And then in the session on the 11th of May, we want to specifically zoom into cash early actions, because that is one of the early actions we see a lot in early action protocols for drought. So here we want to zoom in again. So what kind of early, what is the purpose of the cash early actions at different point in time? How are they organized? And so here in that session, we will then zoom into Lesotho once more and Zimbabwe. And then we will have the last session, end of May, where we again want to have one of this rather big picture session, overarching sessions, where we will look into compounding risks and cascading hazards, and also the impacts of climate change when we're talking about drought. So here we want to wrap up basically everything that we've learned and add another layer of complexity. So this is a bit what is in for us in this session. And you've all successfully registered already. If you have gotten the link from a colleague, you can still register for the sessions that are here on the screen. And if you have any questions, any feedback for us, we are always welcome to receive them. So it's me, Karen, from the German Red Cross, and Gigma and Dorothy from the Red Cross and Red Crescent Climate Center. So I will now hand over to Dorothy, who will walk us a little bit through some housekeeping.
Which, if you've been to the other sessions, this is the fifth time you hear this, so apologies. But if you are new, welcome. We're really happy to have you. And thank you so much for showing up every week, those of you who, or every couple of weeks, those of you who've been here. Thanks for being on this journey with us. It's been a real ride. So we really appreciate it. And it's been fascinating to hear from all these different places. Just a bit of housekeeping. Yeah. So each of the sessions are an hour formally. But we do leave the Zoom room open for about half an hour afterwards because we know that there's so much content that we can't get through in an hour. So we like to leave it open for informal conversations. If you want breakout groups, we can make that happen. So yeah, please do stick around for the hour. If you have other meetings or other commitments, please feel very welcome to jump. But if you'd like to stay, we'd love to have informal coffee chats with you afterwards as well. We also, so we're speaking to you right now, but we do want this to be a conversation. We want to hear what you're up to. We want to hear your thoughts, your ideas, disagreements, whatever you want to share. The easiest way to do that right now is through the Zoom chat. You can also unmute your microphones in the kind of Q&A periods after the speakers have presented, but we do, hear from you. So as your stream of consciousness, please pop it in the Zoom chat. We would absolutely love to hear. And then we're going to be circulating a Slido as well. So these are the questions kind of for the Q&A. We're trying to collate all the information and the content that's coming out of these sessions, both from the presenters and from the participants as well, because we know there's such a wealth of expertise. So the Slido and the collaborative notes, which I'll talk about in a second, are helping us kind of compile all those. So Karen will put the link to the Slido at the right moment, but please do add your questions. We'll try to get to them, and if we can't, maybe there's opportunities for further research, there's opportunities for further conversations as well. I've popped a link already to the collaborative notes in the Zoom chat. If you can't access them, let me know, but please do contribute. We try to basically note everything that's being said, all the content, all the ideas, as much as possible in these collaborative notes that will then be a public-facing document for anyone to kind of read up on the Drought speaker series. We're going to use it as basis for some publications as well. So please do contribute as much as you like. We'd really appreciate it. Also, please do contribute in whatever language you want, not just English. I think right now most of the comments are in English, but if you do want to, put things in your own language, we can have them translated and there's no problem. On that note, there is a lot of translation available for this session. So thank you again to our wonderful translators and to IFRC for facilitating this. We thought it was really important to have multiple languages in this series. So if you're, so you can click on the interpretation bottom at the top, and then you can pick basically the language. There is going to be a part of this session that is going to be in French. If you can follow along, great. If not, just click the translation and the translators will be able to make the link for you. And then just last, thanks to the Climate Center team of interns who are helping us with the collaborative notes and all these things. And then a big thanks to the Anticipation Hub for facilitating this, and obviously to German Red Cross and the Climate Center as well. So thanks so much and enjoy this session. Over to you, Karen.
Whoops, I think actually over to Gigma. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Dorothy, for the housekeeping. Always good to be reminded of what is in the house, what we can do, what we cannot do, etc. Thank you very much for that. So as Karen and Dorothy said, we are going to listen today from WHH, and it will be the country team in Madagascar. So maybe before I elaborate a little bit more on what the session will be about today, I can just give you an idea of who expects to be present today in our presentation. So we'll have, of course, WHH, but we also have, just like last week, a national institution, a government institution of Madagascar, joining them to present. So those who are going to speak to us today are Radanielina Miharinsoa. Yeah. So she is the head of the FBF project in Madagascar. By training, she is an engineer, and she specialized in meteorology, and she has worked for WHH within the FBA focus-based action team project for now 3 years as a scientific advisor. So we are going to listen from a dinosaur of anticipatory action in Madagascar. The second speaker from the government of Madagascar would be Raunivelo Nyanja. I hope my pronunciation is correct. And he is the head of the Analysis, Synthesis, and Orientation Department at the National Risk and Disaster Management Office. He also is the president of the National Vulnerability Assessment Committee, NVAC. And he also leads all household economic analysis initiatives in the country. So this is another let's say dinosaur to listen to. So this is what we have in terms of speakers. Now, what will they be speaking about? I think we have, as we heard last week, we are working on understanding how we forecast drought, how we develop the triggers. So today's session is going to be sort of continuation of what we did last week. And for that specific session, it will be more about getting into the complexity of the drought trigger. So it is possible, for example, to have triggers that are very complex. Some may also be relatively less complex. So in the Madagascar team, they have decided to quite go for a trigger which is, I would say, quite complex. So we already have some questions for them, and it is actually to these questions that I will try to provide answers. The first one would be, first of all, of course, what's the country forecasting capacity that you have been able to face when you started? So you wanted to reach a certain level of complexity, but there was something already available. So what was that capacity? And how were you able to engage with the national institutions? Last week, we heard from Kenya Meteorological Department. This week, it is another government agency that we're going to listen to. And since we are working on a complex forecasting system, this is not just then predicting the rainfall for the season. It is about predicting the impacts of the drought. So the actual question that we may have is basically, what impacts should we focus on? Because drought may have lots and lots of impacts, and it's not always easy to kind of decide what are the impacts we should focus on. So we would listen to the experience from the Madagascar team to kind of understand how is the process, what impact did they decide to focus on, and more importantly, why these forecasts specifically. And then if you go for this kind of forecast for impact forecasting, for example, what's the concrete benefit of that versus only using a simple model? For example, if I'm using a rainfall model and I'm getting a similar, let's say, outcome as the impact model, what's the use of that? So we are going to see what is the benefit in using this impact forecasting. And also, since it is no longer just about rainfall, how then will they define the thresholds? So these are some guiding questions of the presentation that we have today. So maybe I will pass back to Karen to take us through some discussions before I introduce the speakers again. Karen?
I can jump in if we want. We're keen to know, so we're kind of seeing different names in the chat, and keen to know what your level of understanding of what a drought trigger actually is, what in like your different organizations, how are you working on this? What goes into the triggers that you're working on currently, or any questions you have. So this is where you're going to try out using the Zoom chat. We want to know from you, what do you think are the key elements of a drought trigger system? You can take a couple minutes. What are the key elements that goes into a drought trigger system? So when a climate scientist like Igma goes and is asked to develop a trigger, what is it that he's looking for in terms of information, in terms of data, in terms of components? And we want you to write it in the chat. Don't press send right away. So kind of gather your thoughts, answer the question in the chat, and then in 10 seconds, yeah, Karen is like, in about 10 seconds, I'm going to say go, and then you're all going to put your ideas at once. It's going to be a bit more exciting. Yes. So have a think. What goes into a drought trigger? There are no wrong answers. There seems to be some background noise. If someone is not on mute necessarily. Thanks, whoever did that. That was great. All right, so do you have an answer? So what goes into a drought trigger? All right, are we ready? So 3, 2, 1, go. What goes into a drought trigger? You can press send on the chat. IPC, focus on food security. ENSO oscillations, seasonal forecasting, weekly forecasts. Anything else? I know there are more answers in this group than these two answers. And Gigma, you can cheat and put in questions as well. What goes into a drought trigger? Rainfall, rainfall observations, vulnerability and impact data, vegetation cover.
I think we have a lot of experts in the room already.
I think so. So I feel like there's other things. What else do you need to know? Rainfall forecasts, livestock status. Keep them coming. There's things in there. Gigman, what do you see? Are you seeing anything that's missing in the chat right now?
I really think it's nearly all there. Just that, as people know, there are different types of drought, and one such a type is, for example, the hydrological drought. So we might also be interested, apart from rainfall, for example, into the forecast of river stream flow. So this is an example of another thing that can be part of it. We also have soil moisture, for example. We also have, okay, this is already there, lots of food security assessments. Basically what IPC already does. IPC in most of the regions of the world. In West Africa, if you have people from West Africa joining, it is basically, when we talk about IPC, it's basically what the cadre harmonisé does for West Africa. This is basically trying to predict the outcome of the food security classes or food security categories for the upcoming few months or just the present situation. So all this can be used to develop a trigger calendar. I've seen something, if I can have, like, no, 5 minutes, five seconds, I've seen something on dry spell observations. This is actually something I wanted to put as a question to the presenting team today, because we are now more and more facing this challenge of separating drought from dry spells. You have regions where dry spells are even let's say, more impactful than drought. Not that they are more impactful, but that drought are less recurrent, whereas dry spells are occurring more and more. So I think we have to be quite careful. Maybe we'll listen later to the experience in Madagascar. We have to be quite careful because dry spell can be misleading. If you want, for example, to develop a trigger which is based on drought solely, and we have dry spells occurring in the country, we might never be able to activate it because the definition of the hazard is significantly different. So we have to be quite careful about that. We also have the notion of flash drought, which is close to dry spells. But yeah, we have to be quite careful. I think this is, when we talk about dry spells or drought, it has more to do with, let's say, the approach to drought rather than the definition of the drought, which is about what variables we are using to detect or to predict the drought. Sorry for taking too long, Dorothy.
No, this is great. I'm also curious. So one thing that we've been talking about a lot in the last couple of sessions has been that different organizations have different types of requirements for their triggers for anticipatory action for drought. We're going to hear today from Weltunga Hilfe at some point, and from others as well. And some of you, I see people from the movement here as well. So my question, and maybe we could have an open mic on this, is why do we think that there are different types of triggers for drought? Why, and what do we think the effect of that is? And what are maybe commonalities between the different triggers that different organizations have? Gigma, you might have an answer to this because I know you've been working on this. Maybe you can get us started and we can open the mics to everyone.
I need to scratch my head first, because indeed we often have different triggers, different approaches to the trigger. And I guess this is because also the ultimate goals of our drought programs are also quite different. At the Red Cross, we are interested in purely humanitarian situations, and we need to have a trigger that returns on average at most once every 5 years. So This therefore will lead us to kind of look for very strict and very kind of severe levels of thresholds for the triggers, whereas other organizations might have more funding and then be more flexible. So this is something we need to be aware of. I also know that the priorities for the organization in terms of support, because if you want to support, for example, farming communities versus, I don't know, livestock farmer or other type of communities, this will also yield different types of triggers, for example. And I guess this is one of the reasons we may have different approaches to the drought trigger. I think most of us here are from the Red Cross. Maybe let's listen to WHH. They may want to start their presentation now. Julia is ready, I think. They may want to start their presentation, and by the end, we'll try to understand what's the difference between their triggers in general and ours, and see what would be the differences, and get to know how we can learn from each other. With this, I think I can hand over to Julia from WHH.
Thank you very much. So first of all, thank you so much for having us here. I think it's a huge opportunity for us as Welthungerhilfe. It was originally not planned that I am presenting, but my colleague from Madagascar, Miarinsu. But yeah, unfortunately, we don't know where she is. I think there's some internet issues. We cannot reach her. So I will take over. Just for your information, I'm Julia. I'm the meal advisor for our focus-based action program, which is implemented since 2020. I will take over the presentation. I'm not a technical expert, but I will try my best to make you understand what we are doing in Madagascar. So let me quickly try to share my screen, and you can let me know if you see it.
Perfectly.
Perfect. Okay, so as you heard, our project is called Forecast-Based Action Program, which is implemented in Madagascar. We want to present our drought model here today. Normally, this would have been done by Miarinsu Radanelina, who is our HOP or head of project for the Forecast-Based Action Program at Welthungerhilfe in Madagascar. I first want to give a short introduction to Welthungerhilfe. As I've heard, not a lot of you know how to pronounce or know who Welthungerhilfe is. So you're more than welcome to call us also WHH, since this year we also included this in our logo, which you can see above here. It's new. So yeah, we also now go under WHH. So Welthungerhilfe, if you're not able to pronounce it, we have a solution for that now. Welthungerhilfe is one of the largest private aid organizations in Germany. We work in the global clusters of food security, wash, and logistics. We are dual mandated, meaning we work in development and in humanitarian action, and we follow a rights-based approach. We are not that small, as you can see. We have more than 3,000 employees from 19 nations, and we work in 36 countries with 255 partner organizations. Yeah, and our common goal is zero hunger. Here you can see the different countries we worked in. And we work on 3 continents in 36 countries. And as you can see here a little bit is that our focus is more on Sub-Saharan Africa, but we do also work in other parts of the world. Here again, you can see from our project funding that, yeah, most of it goes to Africa, but also Asia, etc. And a huge part of our portfolio is humanitarian aid. Just so you get a quick overview of who Welthungerhilfe is and what we are doing. And Welthungerhilfe is also following the humanitarian paradigm shift, meaning that we want to get away from solely working very reactive, but instead also concentrating more on building resilience. Anticipation is a huge part of that, and emergency preparedness. We know that we cannot prevent the shocks from happening, but at least we can prevent or mitigate the losses and damages who occur. So this has been a huge part of our journey in the last years. And part of this, or a huge part of that journey, was also the Forecast-Based Action Program, which is implemented in Madagascar, Kenya, and Zimbabwe. Madagascar actually was our pilot country, where we started the whole Forecast-Based Action journey as Welthungerhilfe in 2017, also already on drought. The project is supported by the GFFO since 2020, where we then started to replicate the whole approach in also Zimbabwe and Kenya and extend or replicate our early action protocol regions also within Madagascar. And yeah, the whole vision of the whole program is advancing the humanitarian paradigm shift and mainstreaming it into our humanitarian programming, but also, of course, to always think about the sensitization and the involvement of the governmental structures in the functioning and the relevance of the forecast-based action approach. And what we also want to do is to enable other NGOs, especially also local NGOs, to engage in forecast-based action and become so-called custodians for our new early action protocol zones. For Madagascar, these are the regions we are currently working in. As you can see here in the north, these are more the regions we were working in our pilot project from 2017 on. And now, as we kind of convinced the government and all the institutions that forecast-based action is something worthwhile doing, we also extended it to the much more drought-prone ground suit. So also now here in these regions, this is where we are working. As I told you, I'm not a technical expert, so I will try to do this very short. And if there are any experts here and I do anything, or if I explain anything wrong, you're more than welcome to let me know and maybe let the rest know how it actually works. But yeah, we have the WRSI, the Water Requirement Satisfaction Index. And there are several parameters going into this. Some of them are parameters concerning our reference crop, which in Madagascar is upland hill rice, which is the date of seeding, then the length of the vegetative cycle, and the culture coefficient. Then we also look at soil parameters, so the soil retention capacity, and meteorological parameters like precipitation and evapotranspiration. To this, I cannot tell you a lot, but yeah, we try to do impact maps where you can see how much rainfall has fallen and how the WRSI looks like in the different regions we are working in. And this is where I can tell you a little bit more. So basically what our model does, it looks at the reference crop as we basically want to forecast food insecurity caused by drought. So we look at how much water a crop needs to go through the whole vegetative cycle and in the end have a crop which is able to feed the population. So here you can see that normally there's 100% of water need, 60% is something where the crop is still sufficient enough, and then there's the deficit. So as soon as you have the deficit, the 40% deficit, there's drought condition. And we can then multiply this with the vulnerability of the community to kind of quantify the impact. Here you can see again what our vulnerability data is. So we use the HEA index, which is the household economy analysis, which specifically looks at the coping strategies and livelihood zones of the different populations to kind of see how they are affected by drought. And of course, the WRSI. And here you can see our model. So it's not something really fancy. We don't have a really fancy dashboard or anything, but it's basically an Excel table telling us about the vulnerability. So the HEA household economic analysis data and the trigger thresholds, which you can see there above. And it calculates, kind of a threshold data. So when we have three different, when there are three decades where we have an activation, this is actually when our automatic system is triggered and where financial where the financial system behind the forecast-based action approach is then triggered. So funding is dispersed for our early action protocols to be set in action. So this is for the north. In the south, where there's much more drought conditions, which are much higher, then we only need 2 successive decades to be activated, and the system is then set into motion. There's also a third option which could pan out, and this would be that the model finds does not find an early season until the 3rd decade of January, and then also the model is triggered. Here you can see our crop calendar, or the trigger calendar. So we here in the green section see how a normal season would look like. So a season where there's enough rainfall, enough water in the soil that the seeds are actually pop open, and we have a crop to be harvested. And then here in the red section, you see how an abnormal season would look like. So here you can see that here is where the model would actually tell us that there is a WRSA value less than 50 for a trigger, and here less than the defined threshold value. So this is normally where we would have the trigger. So at the end of the seeding phase or the vegetative phase. And then here we would have the window of opportunity for our early actions to be implemented right before the peak of the hunger season. Then we wanted to talk a little bit more about how we sensitize and involve the government. It's very unfortunate that Miarinsu and her colleague from the BNGRC are now not here, because I think they would have done a much better job. But just maybe from my side, we really want to try to include the governmental structures such as the National Disaster Risk Management Authorities and local national Met offices in our work. We do this, for instance, by working together or collaborating on the scientific drought trigger model. So the model I just presented to you, hopefully quite understandable and correctly, is done together with the BNGRC and the DGM, which is the Met office. But we also work on the early action protocol development together with them, and we try to prioritize early actions with the different stakeholders and the communities. We did have a trigger in 2021 where we had early cash being distributed in the north of the country. And after that, we did a trigger evaluation to kind of see if our trigger was correct, if it was high enough, and if there were any problems within the trigger system. So we've seen that one of our districts might have not triggered because we saw in the IPC data that there was a forecasted food insecurity predicted. And there we kind of discussed if we need to readjust the parameters to optimize the system. In the end, we found out that these food insecurity issues were not due to drought. So we didn't have to do that. Something else we discussed was that we need to integrate seasonal rainfall forecasts during October and January into our model. Because the predictability of this precipitation, at this period is very high, so it has a strong correlation with our other indicators. And also what we saw is that we need to improve our trigger information exchange. So we saw that our communication on our trigger could have been done better. So we identified that we need to have exclusive mailing lists where we kind of communicate our trigger information on, have a better frequency and set of our drought bulletin, which is published every month. So this is done now on a much more institutionalized basis. We worked on this drought bulletin together also with the institutions to kind of get their insight on what they need from our side. So I have an example here for you. This is one of our trigger bulletins. These are We have drought bulletins every month for all of our regions where we really have the situation on the ground, what is our model saying, and how close are we to triggering. So I think that is it from our side. And then I would give back to Gingma or Karen.
Thank you very much for such a presentation for someone who said that she's not a technical person. Wow. Thank you very much. We have a couple of questions in the slide though already, so maybe we might need to take them before we can move on with more direct questions. Unfortunately, I don't know if it's unfortunate or fortunate, but we have so many questions. I'm not sure if we'll be able to go through all of them. But let's start and we'll see. First of all, in terms of collaboration, so I guess this question is for organizations that are not necessarily government institutions. So there is a question for you. What has been your collaboration with other organizations working on drought in Madagascar? I guess that this is not for the government, but the other institutions. I'm not sure what is the context in Madagascar, but maybe we may have like Save the Children, WFP, or other organizations working on drought. So have you been able to collaborate with them on that project?
So one very close collaboration we have is with the START network and their members in country. So we have the so-called EAP custodianship approach, which means that we do not necessarily only develop the early action protocols ourselves or alone, but instead we tender this to all of the different START network members in country. This is the same also for Kenya and for Zimbabwe. So we said we don't want to do this alone, but we need to do this, as kind of a NGO, kind of find NGO synergies in this. So in Madagascar, we have CRS who are working with us on this, who also took over some of the regions to develop early action protocols. They're invited to all of our learning workshops, all the different meetings we have to kind of also get their input. So START Network and CRS are very much involved, and also other START Network members who are interested, but not necessarily involved there or develop their own early action protocols. And also we have close collaboration with FAO and WFP. So for example, for the HEA data, which is a very extensive and also expensive approach. We work together with FAO and WFP, to my knowledge, to kind of update the data which was needed for us to have the most recent vulnerability data.
Thank you very much. We have other questions that are quite, some are quite repetitive. You talked about the fact that maybe drought, or let's say food insecurity, might be caused, or food price increase might be caused by other factors than drought. So there was a question that wanted to know what caused this food insecurity or food price increase if it was not drought. The person is not sure if you have already mentioned that or not, but I think everyone would be interested to know more about that. So in case we have food insecurity in Madagascar, in your context. In Madagascar, you have food insecurity or food price. Of course, some of them will be related to drought, but in case you observe this food price increase and it is not related to drought, do you know other drivers of that food insecurity or that food price increase?
This would be a very good question for my colleagues who are much more experts on their context. I'll try my best. So if the question is specifically to the EAP region, where we didn't have where we first thought that maybe our trigger model hasn't functioned as we wanted to, but then in the end, I cannot really tell you what the exact reason was for the rise in food security or the projected rise in food security. But I know from other contexts that we also have problems in food insecurity if there's been floods beforehand, and there was actually too much water, and then the crops have, or the seeds have been washed out of the ground, and then also there's no crop or harvest in the end.
Thank you for that. And to the participants, sorry, as you see on the slide, we have too many questions, so I'm not sure if we could be able to go through all of them. I'm just trying also to pick the most relevant. We are maybe moving a bit more technically, more into technical questions. So, Julia, maybe can you tell us again what was the lead time of your WRSI model? That is, on average, when you issue an alert, how long do your teams have to implement actions before the occurrence of the drought indeed?
So
on average. And maybe in addition to that, in order not to ask another question after, because it is a follow-up question, I think it is also, is that enough for you to take these actions?
So we have a lead time of 1 month where we really want to start our work, which, in case of drought, we often go for early cash, and we notice that 1 month of lead time is sometimes, for being prepared for this kind of actions which you need to take is, quite short. So what we now want to do is have a kind of secondary trigger, or preparedness trigger, more to say like that. So we have a preparedness trigger, which maybe is not that, how do you call this? Very good in forecasting, but at least we have an indication on how the situation would look like. And we will use this one to have no cost or low cost preparedness measures in place that we can be in line with this 1 month of lead time where we want to implement in case there is an actual trigger of our drought model, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does, at least to me. Maybe still on the quite technical questions. How do you combine the WRSI forecast with the HEA analysis? I think it is the Household Economic Analysis. How? Because the HEA is a purely socio-economic indicator, whereas the WRSI is a purely physical indicator. So how were you able to combine the two?
To answer this now, I think this would be very technical, and I'm not sure if I can actually do that, but I can definitely in the chat post a document where it's all explained in detail. So hopefully then it will make sense to you, and you'll have the answer as soon as I post it and you read the document.
Yeah, that will help a lot. One other question is, maybe since you're using WRSI, which is just a way of doing these calculations, my question maybe would be, do you get that from the National Met Service, or do you get them from external sources, from international forecasting centers?
We work together with the DGM, so the National Met Office, and we have also worked together with the DGM to build more weather stations. So basically the data is coming from the government institutions we are working with. We have agreements with them that we receive the data. So yeah, this is for us open access data. We don't need to pay anything for this, and this is also what Welthungerhilfe is following in general, that data needs to be open access to guarantee that there's some sustainability in this in this model.
And so far, this collaboration has been nice. I mean, the Met Service has accepted to publicly or to openly share the data with you.
Exactly.
Maybe other people might have some experiences they would like to share, or some questions that they may have on that. Maybe before we continue with the questions, I know we have so many questions and we need to go through all of them, but maybe just to reflect on that for other people who have, I don't know, who are partnering with other National Met Services elsewhere. Not, for example, Anita is around. So what has been your experience, for example, in Lesotho or in a country like Namibia? Maybe also for WHH to get something out of these discussions. Anita, would you want to come in?
Sorry, Gigma, I also have really horrible internet here in Germany. Can you just repeat that?
Just wanted to know a bit of your experience working with National Met Services in Lesotho and in Namibia, or in other contexts, because WHH was telling us that they have been able to set up an open data sharing system with the National Meteorological Service in Madagascar. And I just wanted to check that across other regions, across other countries, the same experience has also been set up, or if things haven't been that great elsewhere.
I think it
What
really
was your experience?
Yeah, it really varies on the capacity of the Met services, I think, and a little bit at the stage at which I would say the anticipatory action community is at. You know, if you have a strong anticipation community and enough voices to speak up, then I think very busy Met offices are more likely to try and prioritize amongst like a really, you know, huge long to-do list that they have with an impossible budget and an impossible number of staff usually. So I think it really depends a bit on that, and then also, yeah, the Met services itself. So, for example, in Namibia, you know, GIGMA, they really lack staff and capacity. So, as much as they might want to support us, they really struggle. And in Lesotho, I think they have a little bit stronger Met services, so it's a little bit easier, and also the anticipation community there, I think, is a bit stronger right now. So I'm also not an expert. So I think from an outsider's perspective, the countries can be really quite different. But having said that, like, this is where we kind of really rely on like experts like yourself to help us complement and support those national agencies and complement using some of these global forecast models. So it's kind of like really interesting, lots of problem solving, and there's almost always some kind of way to manage. Where there's a will, there's a way, we say in English. Over.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for that. I think we need to proceed with the questions. There are quite many. So Julia, back to you. I hope you're able to kind of rest a little bit while Anita was speaking. The question some people are often also asking is the issue of you now sharing your bulletins, your drought bulletins with external partners. So you said that on a monthly basis, you are updating your drought bulletin. So are you sharing that only across your team? Are you sharing that with the government, local services, or how is it going? How is the sharing of your information working?
So we're sharing this actually with everyone in country who's interested in anticipatory action. So we share it with FAO, WFP, with all the different governmental institutions interested. So definitely BNGRC and the Met Office. So the National Disaster Management Authority and the Met Office. We share it with the START network partners in country. So this is not something which is closed shop, but we really want to share with everyone who's interested.
Thank you. One silly question from, you know, that the room is full of Red Cross people. There was one question that just want to know whether or not these bulletins are then also shared with the Red Cross, with the Madagascar Red Cross, the National Society.
It should be. I don't want to promise too much, but if it's not, then there's definitely no harm in doing that. So let us know if we don't, and then we will, but probably we do.
Thank you very much. So let's take a step a little bit back from the very technical approach to it, and now talk a little bit about the actions. So your main action is cash, anticipatory cash, but then there is this question, apart from cash, do you try to warn the populations in advance? So are you conducting any activities related to warning the populations that a drought is coming? Is it something that you also have, or is it maybe something that you may want to add to your future activities?
Definitely something we want to do. Also, we planned it already in our first trigger in 2021, but in the end, the preparedness trigger wasn't there yet, so we were not fast enough to do that. But in future, we definitely want to add that component. It's something which we have also written down in our protocols, and something we have done also with our Freddy response when the cyclone now hit Madagascar, where we did an information campaign on the cyclone. Where we have a lot of learnings, and definitely something we want to do in future.
That's interesting to know. I know that elsewhere in Namibia, for example, for the Drought Early Action Protocol, any single action they want to take to implement on the ground, they try to kind of make it be preceded by a warning that they're disseminating to the population. So before they give cash, for example, 1 week before that, they will go around the communities and just let them know that there is a drought coming, and they should be taking action to kind of reduce the impacts as much as possible. And then they will then select the most vulnerable communities and then say that these are the most eligible for the cash support. So yeah, this is what just I wanted to add on that. Maybe going back again to the question, and maybe for the audience to know, the next session that we're going to have will be about cash. Not the next one, but the following one. Definitely, we're going to talk about cash in this series. So going back to the chat, and again a bit more technical. You are using observations and forecasting. That is, you are able to predict what will come, but you're also able to monitor what is already there. So there is this question: did I understand correctly that your trigger is based more on the observation than on the forecast? So do you, in your trigger, do you give more weight to the observation, or do you act more based on the forecast?
So we work more on observation, because basically what we do is more to predict the food insecurity caused by drought. So we more look at the drought situation, how is it developing, and then we kind of see that we implement before the drought peak hits. But yeah, so actually it's observation, so we can predict that there will be less harvest and therefore food insecurity.
Great. I also have a personal question that I also need to put before I'm asked to stop. Maybe, and this is again regarding the trigger definitions. You have used this kind of quite complex, because WRSI is a relatively complex trigger. Have you tried to assess the advantage of using it over using gas precipitation? We know that Madagascar is part of the Southern Africa community, and there are the seasonal outlook that are issued every year. I think in it should be in November or in October. So my question is, do you think, first of all, have you done an assessment of your the benefits of your model over using gas rainfall, using gas as the seasonal just the seasonal outlook from the SADC community? Or in case you haven't done that, from your own experience from working on the ground, do you perceive any benefit in using that complex model?
So I'm not too sure if we've done any assessment, but I'm pretty sure, and I think our technical expert would be much better inclined to answer this question. So I'm happy to tell Miarinsu to give maybe a written answer to that. But what we have seen, what our model does very well, is to look at the local context. So look closely in the different wards on a very detailed level how the drought situation looks like. So that's why our model so far has been serving us quite well. Our model is not supposed to look at a whole big region and predict drought, but instead really go into detail, have a localized look at a small district and see if there's drought conditions there. So I think there's where this detail of our model has been serving us quite well.
That's nice. Thank you very much. Maybe I will just open the floor to anyone who would like to ask a question that was not on the slide, but just for you to know, we only have 1 minute. So in 1 minute, if you can ask your question, and then Judah will answer it before we can wrap up this session. So the floor is open.
Anita, go ahead.
Yeah. Anita?
Yeah, sorry, very laggy computer. So Julia, I feel really bad to put you on the spot, as I think you're doing an amazing job. You seem to know so much. But do you know, I'm quite interested in social protection, and I know in Madagascar, the government's response in terms of like co-leading the cash working group and using their social protection systems to harmonize the humanitarian response to COVID in urban areas. It was very, very strong. So that would be something that I would probably take a look at in Madagascar. So I'm just kind of curious to know whether or not there was any feasibility on that, or if you've considered working with the social protection systems, either just in terms of like the targeting and registration, or the delivery mechanisms for cash, or the grievance mechanisms, complaints mechanisms, or any part of the system.
I don't know how it looked in detail, but what I know is that during our implementation in 2021, we definitely talked to the different authorities to kind of align our cash intervention with the standards of the social safety net. So definitely there has been some collaboration, but how it looks in detail and what was done, I think, yeah, my colleagues are much more informed.
Great. Thanks a lot. That in itself is interesting, that you tried to harmonize with the safety nets, because I think, I mean, first of all, Drought gives the opportunity to kind of like, you can do some targeting and really kind of work with those systems. It's slow onset, but also that sometimes those payments are much less than humanitarians would pay, with the, our standards and our needs to kind of meet those standards. So yeah, I'm really interested, and we'll definitely follow up to learn more. Thanks a lot, Julia.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. I don't see another hand, so maybe I will hand over to Dorothy to wrap up the session.
Thanks so much, Gigma. Julia, I think this is proof when we say that M&E people know everything. Thank you for jumping in last minute. It's a shame that your colleagues weren't able to join, but I think they'll be very pleased with the way this worked. We really appreciate it. And thank you also for sharing in the chat. Everyone, if you didn't see, Julia shared a couple documents that could be really nice for people to look at if they're keen as well. And then please do use the chat if you have other resources on triggers that you'd like people to read, articles, blogs, reports, please do pop them in there. It would be nice to have some sort of like bank on people's favorite trigger related resources, so do share. So everyone, we've got only a couple minutes to wrap this up. So I think, yeah, just from our side, just wanted to, thank you all for being here. Thank you for the discussions. Thank you for thinking along on this complex question of what actually is a drought trigger, what goes into it, what are the things that we need to be paying attention to, what are the pitfalls, what are things that work really well. And I think the presentation was quite helpful for that, as were many of the questions that were put in the Slido and the chat. So thank you again for that. And then just an invitation to join us again in 2 weeks' time. We're going to be talking about early action. So we have two kind of more technical sessions like this one about early action. So once you kind of know what your drought risk is, once you know what drought impacts are occurring in the area in which you're working, once you really understand the kind of underlying drivers and how anticipatory action can help with one of those aspects, then you set up triggers, you look at forecasts, you look at tools, you do all this stuff, and then you have to decide, well, okay, what is it that I'm actually going to do? And what are the actions that we want to do as different organizations? What do we want to promote in terms of individuals and communities taking action as well? So that's the focus of the two next sessions. The first one is a little bit more meta, a little bit more theoretical, about kind of theories of change behind developing drought early actions, why it's important to ensure that the early actions fit the impacts that we're concerned about, that there are assumptions that are kind of debunked and worked through in quite collaborative manners with different perspectives on the content of the drought early actions. How is it that we do it? And then Karen's running a session in, I guess it's already a month's time, about cash specifically. So all those of you who are cash experts, please join, come share your expertise, and that's specifically about cash interventions. And then we have our last session right before World Drought Day, which is going to be kind of a big wrap-up bang splashy session where we're going to ask people to reflect on your experience of taking this journey with us. It's exactly 2 on my clock, so thank you so much everyone for joining. If you'd like to stick around for 30 more minutes to just kind of have chat with different colleagues, please do. And if not, we'll see you in a couple weeks.